The exploding IRS scandal has brought to light many things, like how President Obama, as Richard Nixon thought about doing 40 years ago, might have used the Internal Revenue Service to attack his political enemies, their donors, and supporters. How ideologically twisted Obama operatives inside the IRS used their authority and positions to break federal law to aid in the re-election of the president. Now, whether it was a directive coming out of the White House or the committee to re-elect the president in the White House, this question just might be answered in the very near future. Now that Judicial Watch, a government watchdog group, has just won a huge court case that will finally have IRS officials under oath in an actual court case, and not the toothless congressional oversight hearings, the lid just might be blown off this impeachment powder keg. Destroying or hiding evidence by a federal worker is one of the worst crimes a public servant can commit. I personally think that the Lois Lerner emails, as well as others, are either backed up on a flash drive somewhere and/or the printed hard copies of those emails are tucked away somewhere as a get-out-of-jail-free card for Take the Fifth Lois and the other perpetrators. Another thing that might speed along America's quest for the real truth in the IRS targeting is if the House actually arrests Lois Lerner. Since she has been held in contempt of Congress after a vote that saw a handful of Democrats side with the Republicans, the House has every right to send the sergeant-at-arms to arrest her. But as usual, the House GOP is scared of what it might look like politically. I would like to ask the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, and the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, one question. When did the rule of law of the United States get circumvented by optics? If you want the other culprits in this heinous treason of the public's trust to point the finger at the higher-ups who actually ordered the targeting, put Lois Lerner in jail and wait for the chirping coming from the others who will turn into songbirds. Last week on the Ascend Conservatism show, we discussed Article 2 of the impeachment papers that were written against Richard Nixon before he resigned, and how eerily they mirrored the transgressions of this administration. The difference between then and now is that while a Republican president was accused of high crimes and misdemeanors, the Republicans in Congress actually did their job and acted out of the interest for their country and not in full protection mode of their president at the time. Today's Democrats have absolute no moral scruples and care nothing about the rule of law and care only about partisan politics and trying to save their ever-damaged image as a party of corruption and thuggery. With Nixon, the Attorney General at the time, Nixon's Attorney General was ordered by him to fire the special prosecutor in the Watergate scandal, and instead of comply, he resigned. Such integrity, I'm sad to say, cannot be found in the current Attorney General of the United States. Eric Holder is the current Attorney General and is the only cabinet member in the history of the United States to be held in contempt of Congress. He has been caught perjuring himself not once, but twice, during testimony on Capitol Hill. He has lied under oath in the Fast and Furious investigation and also in the James Rosen testimony where he tried to intimidate the Fox News reporter by naming him as a criminal co-conspirator for the story he was writing. This level of lawlessness has not been seen since Nixon's first Attorney General, who went to prison over the Watergate scandal. While Eric Holder has acted like he is above the law and has even attacked regular American citizens for most of his toxic 5.5 years as head of the Department of Justice, the IRS scandal just might be his undoing. The Senate and House Republicans have seen enough of this pure political hack of an Attorney General that has turned the DOJ into the Department of Injustice. Many on Capitol Hill have already started gathering information to impeach him. And some senators and congressmen have sworn that if Holder refuses to appoint a special prosecutor in the IRS scandal, the movement to impeach him and remove him will officially begin with an immediate no-confidence vote in Congress. While dereliction of duty by Eric Holder, when it comes to shielding the president from getting caught in his crimes and misdemeanors, it has become commonplace for this disgraced AG to block true justice. From the first days of this tyrannical administration, it was obvious that Eric Holder would serve his own brand of justice and disregard the written law, especially the Constitution. with the only evidence of voter intimidation from 2008 showing the new Black Panthers on video brandishing clubs and threatening voters in Philadelphia, Eric Holder ordered all charges be dropped against them without a hint of shame. The Department of Injustice's 4-year agenda was set. It's Holder and Obama's rule of law, not American jurisprudence. During the Bush administration, the Attorney General had prosecuted and imprisoned crooked executives at Enron at the beginning of his administration, all the way through to the end of his tenure as Bush and his AG prosecuted Wall Street Ponzi king Bernie Madoff. During President Obama and Eric Holder's 5.5 years, nobody from Wall Street was even indicted over transgressions during the Dow crash or since. Of course, all the donations from Wall Street fat cats to the Committee to Re-elect the President shielded them from any Department of Justice inquiries. Who was not so fortunate to have the Attorney General and the President himself in their pocket was the American people. Eric Holder has sued Americans from all walks of life, from a local sheriff and poor inner-city kids to actually taking to court 7 sovereign states and threatening to sue an 8th. While the previous attorneys general under a Republican administration went after white-collar crimes like Enron and Madoff, they also worked to keep Main Street safe. Under Bush, street crime plummeted. The AGs during those 8 years also prosecuted the war on terror here at home as well as abroad. Unfortunately for this great nation, Eric Holder, on Barack Obama's directive, pursued a purely political agenda, and the rule of law be damned. Before Richard Nixon's re-election run, his Attorney General, John Mitchell, resigned to be the director of the campaign. Eric Holder didn't have the decency to resign, but he basically ran the legal campaign for the Committee to Re-elect the President. He used his power at the DOJ as a personal weapon to stem the tide of states trying to thwart Democrat voter fraud. Just to push it past November 2012 to help Obama squeak by to get another 4 years, as all the polls showed him losing a legitimate vote. The Department of Injustice sued the sovereign state of Florida as they were following written law for actually trying to take illegals and dead people off the voter rolls, off the official voter rolls. As former Congressman Allen West can attest to, as his seat was stolen by voter fraud, Democrats can't win without voter fraud. Of the 175,000 registered voters in St. Lucie County, Florida, Allen West District, 247,000 actually voted, unseating West as well as handing Florida, along with other dubious counties' returns, to Obama. When you think for a second that the average voter turnout is about 50% anyway, this election theft was astounding. Just weeks before the presidential election, well-respected Suffolk polling company left Florida altogether because, as they said, it was painted red for Romney. But Holder's suit against Florida worked and handed the most important swing state to the president. Holder wasn't done in his work for the Obama campaign. He sued Texas, North Carolina, and South Carolina for legally passing voter ID laws. Even after the Supreme Court recently struck down parts of the arcane Voting Rights Act, Holder sued Texas again. But the most egregious thuggery against the state, just to promote voter fraud in another huge swing state, Holder went after the sovereign state of Pennsylvania and its new, legally passed voter ID law. He successfully used his now commonplace technique of using the DOJ to intimidate and twist the state officials' arms to delay the ID law until after the 2012 election. This, as in cases all over the big cities in Pennsylvania, allowed Obama to garner from 114% to 150% of the vote in most districts and steal another invaluable battleground state. So not only did he sue sovereign states, but threaten others to perpetuate the voter fraud that got President Obama reelected in 2012. Consider this. Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney by only 333,000 votes spread out over just 4 battleground states. That is less than 167,000 votes flipped from Romney to Obama illegally. With Obamonomics continuing the country's record misery 5.5 years into this disastrous presidency, we have the worst, most brazen political operative to ever run the Justice Department, Eric Holder, to thank. During all this time that Eric Holder was suing sovereign states to perpetuate voter fraud just to get his boss reelected, what happened to real crime under his watch? By his actions, you may not know this, but he is supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the country. Under his watch, crime has skyrocketed in the inner cities like his and President Obama's hometown of Chicago. Murder rates have jumped, especially against black youth. While Obama's horrible economic policies have black youth unemployment hovering around 40%, Eric Holder has let them down in the crime prevention department. Just this last holiday weekend, Chicago had 84 people shot with 14 dead, and that included 14 and 16-year-old boys. While kids are getting killed every day in Chicago at an increasing rate ever since Holder became the chief law enforcement officer in this country, what has he done to improve the lives of the inner-city black youth? Obviously nothing. But he did have time to sue 2 sovereign states to keep the exceptional minority students in the dangerous inner-city public schools by denying them school vouchers. And why did he do this? To placate a huge Democrat Party donor, the teachers' union. So if you are living in poverty and crime in the inner city, if you can donate millions to the DNC, you just might get help from this Attorney General. The Department of Justice under Eric Holder has nothing to do with justice. It's purely party over people. In a brazen pandering to the Hispanic vote, which has taken priority over the black vote for Obama and the Democrats, Holder sued a lowly sheriff in Arizona. A frivolous lawsuit that he had to drop after a while as the judge practically laughed his U.S. attorney out of the courtroom. But with this pathetic attempt to intimidate a sheriff that is just trying to protect his citizens, his job, we see the priorities of Eric Holder: pander to Hispanics for votes and try to subvert the law. This subversion was in clear view back in 2011 when the DOJ sued the sovereign state of Arizona for trying to actually enforce federal immigration laws. Those same laws that the feds refused to follow as the administration's priority from day one was to import more voters from South and Central America by leaving the borders porous and trying to give them amnesty through legislation or executive orders if, as in 2010, the House was captured by the Republicans. Eventually, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer had to give up as the deep pockets and twisted ideology of the new Injustice Department was too much for one state to fight. So as the Department of Justice has spent the bulk of its time intimidating regular citizens, sovereign states, inner-city school children, as well as aiding and abetting voter fraud, what else have they been up to? The DOJ has been shielding President Obama from any incriminating evidence that could get him impeached. For those of you who don't know it, Eric Holder, as Attorney General, has authority over the Federal Bureau of Investigations. He used the FBI early on in the Obama presidency to cover up criminal payoffs of the administration through the EPA to one of Obama's rich, 1%er donors, billionaire Obama campaign fundraiser, donor, and bundler, George Kaiser of Solyndra. Kaiser was a big fat cat donor to Obama and the Democrat Party, who made numerous visits to the White House just before he secured a dubious taxpayer-backed green energy scam loan of $500 million. And this happened right before Solyndra went bankrupt and left the American people holding the bag. In August of 2011, the cover-up began. The FBI, at the direction of Holder, raided Solyndra and confiscated all documents in the corporate offices. Those documents have been thrown down Eric Holder's rabbit hole, never to be seen from again. I wonder if that's the same rabbit hole that Lois Lerner's emails have gone to. But I digress. The FBI confiscated evidence of a money laundering scheme between an Obama donor and summarily made the scandal disappear. While the DOJ made a token effort to recover the lost taxpayer money, the judge ruled that the monies will never be recovered. The Department of Injustice strikes again. I would like someone on the left to explain to me, what is the difference between the cover-up of campaign kickbacks with Solyndra and the 2-bit Watergate break-in that had absolutely no effect on a landslide 49-state victory by Richard Nixon in 1972? Now, most of you out there have heard me here on the Ascend Conservatism show in my weekly column on News Ninja or social media refer to the Department of Justice's Eric Holder as lawless on many occasions. As you can see by some of the actions I have just detailed, he has shamelessly disregarded the rule of law, but on several occasions he is actually technically lawless in the truest sense of the word. He refused to defend the law of the land in the Defense of Marriage Act until it withered without opposition at the Supreme Court. Now, whether you support DOMA or not, that's not the point. The job of the DOJ, and the President for that matter, is to uphold the laws of this country, period. Besides the refusal to do their constitutional duty in the DOMA case, Holder brazenly told his U.S. attorneys which laws they could follow and which laws of the land to ignore. Does this sound like the Department of Justice to you? He also told the state attorneys general that they can disregard laws that they disagree with. What is this? The rule of law Soprano style? You don't like a law? Forget about it. All kidding aside, it is astounding what has happened to the fabric of this nation. The rule of law is what has separated us from other nations that have come and gone before us. During the forming of the United States back around 1776, the principle that no one is above the law was at the core of the Founding Fathers' beliefs. In his pamphlet, Common Sense, Thomas Paine wrote that, quote, "In America, the law is king, for as in absolute governments, the king is law. So in free countries, the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other," unquote. Later, in 1780, John Adams incorporated this principle into the Massachusetts Constitution that he wrote by seeking to establish, quote, "a government of laws and not of men," unquote. Unfortunately, this once great nation is not governed by the rule of law anymore, but by crooked men who pervert the laws, subvert the laws, and ignore the laws to serve their own needs and to protect their own criminal actions. To close out the indictment of Eric Holder, we'll focus on one of the most egregious and impeachable offenses committed by the most insurrectionary and anarchistic attorney generals in history. This is his involvement in the Operation Fast and Furious. Eric Holder's attempts to cover up this powder keg have not been as successful as his other cover-ups. For those of you who are not familiar with the gun-running operation that has caused hundreds of deaths on both sides of the Mexican-American border, I'll sum it up for you. As most of you on the right know, Obama and Holder would love nothing more than to infringe on the Second Amendment rights of American citizens, their right to keep and bear arms. They looked at a small operation that the Bush administration had tried but ended in 2007 because it was unsuccessful, and expanded it 1,000-fold in 2009. They decided to flood the Mexican countryside with automatic weapons bought in the U.S. so they could point to the easy movement of guns to the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel and push for new gun law legislation in the United States. But as with most things attempted by this administration, this simple crisis they intentionally caused to get a reactionary law, like as we see today in the flood of immigrants at the border, the crisis was uncontrollable and got hundreds killed. 2 border enforcement agents were killed by weapons in the hands of the Sinaloa drug cartel that this administration supplied them. Jaime Zapata, an ICE agent, and Brian Terry, a border agent, were gunned down by 2 of the over 3,500 weapons sent to killers south of the border by Obama and Holder, the gun dealers of death. Since October 2009, besides Terry and Zapata, hundreds of Mexican citizens have been murdered by weapons we sent to the killers. Now I keep saying they, meaning Holder and Obama, because they all but admitted that they were behind the gun-running operation when the President exercised executive privilege in all communications between the Department of Justice, Eric Holder, and the White House, Obama. This improper use of executive privilege stopped a congressional investigation into the Fast and Furious by denying the committee evidence that Obama and Holder both said didn't exist in the first place. From the beginning, Eric Holder has been claiming that Operation Fast and Furious was not the administration's idea, but two rogue ATF agents in Arizona. Just like the IRS scandal, this two rogue agents excuse was debunked years ago, when the House Oversight Committee offered Holder and Obama opportunity to prove that they had nothing to do with Fast and Furious by turning over communications between the two. The most transparent administration in history not only used the president's executive privilege to keep damning documents from oversight, but have fought a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request from the government watchdog group Judicial Watch for years. Crooked Eric Holder's luck might just have run out. Just 6 days ago, Judge John D. Bates refused a pathetic attempt to have the FOIA request thrown out and heard arguments from Judicial Watch in the case. Not only has the DOJ tried to hide all evidence of Obama's and Holder's involvement in the murders of hundreds of people, but they have had the gall to suggest to the judge that the Judicial Watch case might encourage Congress to fight harder to get the same documents in separate litigation. Perish the thought. The supposed Department of Justice is trying to hide documents illegally. Executive privilege will be borne out as not being applicable to the Fast and Furious case, but they want to illegally withhold them from Judicial Watch also, even though the Freedom of Information Act specifically states that they have the right to attain them. The irony of this is that while he has been able to shield Obama from impeachable evidence quite successfully up to this point, he just might not be able to shield himself from impeachment once the Fast and Furious documents are unsealed under the Freedom of Information Act. We all will be waiting for a ruling that quite possibly might expose Holder and maybe even the president himself up to civil charges, if not criminal charges. You might ask why the Ascend Conservatism show has put the Attorney General, Eric Holder, in its sights. This country cannot return to greatness until we have returned to a country of laws that govern us and that make no man above the law. Maybe after the Fast and Furious documents get unsealed by a judge in the next few weeks, Holder can receive the justice he has denied so many Americans and suffer the same fate as Nixon's Attorney General and campaign director and spend 19 months in prison like John Mitchell. And that is the Liberal Education Annex on this day, July 14th, 2014. I will be back after these messages.